Hi, everybody. We'll just give everyone a second to come into the room. Got a very exciting afternoon in Britain here. Morning for Ishani Bula, who's in New York. Thanks to Ishani that these masterclasses are happening. Thank you so much to Ishani and the Waverley Ensemble. Is it very, very early where you are? What's the time?
Oh, it's not too bad. Just after 8. Made me get up.
There you go. and what better reason to get up, right?
Exactly.
So as many of you know, this is Karen Jones. You will have heard her on many, many film soundtracks, but she's a very large presence in the London music scene, from symphony orchestras and operas to sessions, and, you know, a great friend of both of ours as well. So Karen, it's just lovely to have you here. How are you managing in lockdown?
Oh, I've got my ways. I've got my ways. Exercising more than I've ever exercised in my life, online with girlfriends every morning. Yeah, you know, I'm one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, and you have actually still been able to do a bit of work as well, haven't you? Been able to
Well, at the minute, you know, Bojo in his wisdom has allowed the recording studios to stay open. So yeah, I'm still working, and that feels so tasteless, and I feel guilty for that. But hey, I'm not going to say no. I don't feel that guilty. Yeah, so I'm still in the studios.
Yeah, it's wonderful because it gives us, it entertains us all when we're all sitting at home watching films on Netflix. It's you, so thank you.
You're most welcome.
Now you're going to be, we're going to watch some pre-recorded masterclasses that you gave earlier this week, and then there's going to be a question and answer at the end. So for the question and answer, any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask Karen, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then when we get to the Q&A session, if you'd like, we can actually bring you into this room so we can all meet you and you can put your question to Karen. Or if you'd rather stay anonymous, do just say that at the beginning. I don't want to be shown. This is just my question. And then I will ask Karen the question for you. But Karen, perhaps you could first of all tell us about the 3 very, very willing, keen ex-students and students of yours who are playing in the masterclass today.
To whom I'm very grateful, all 3 of you. I owe you. So first of all, we're going to hear lovely Sally Palmer. Sally Palmer finished her undergrad at the Royal Academy last year with me. She's already working professionally, but has been hit by lockdown, obviously. And that's who we'll hear first. Second, we'll hear Camille Curtis. Camille finished last year as well as a postgraduate at the Royal Academy with me. Camille is busy teaching online school students, so she's doing very well. And then I've got Ben Griffiths, and Ben and I are contemporaries, and we studied at the Guildhall School together. Ishani, you never know, you may even know him. And he's been teaching flute playing all these years, and he decided it was time to brush his flute playing up and have some lessons. So I've been teaching him for the past couple of years too.
Isn't that great? It's never too late to learn, and a bit of continued professional development is an extremely good idea, especially if you've got time to kill like we all do at the moment. So well done, Ben. Lovely. Thank you so much, Karen. That's great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw Karen and Ishani out of the room. I'm going to play you this masterclass video. It lasts about an hour and a half. So at about 2:40, we're then going to have our question and answer session. Please do put those questions again, like I said, in the Q&A box at the bottom. And here we go. Enjoy.
Hello, Sally. Thank you so much for turning up for this. You've just told me this is your first Zoom or online flute lesson ever.
Ever, yeah. With me being a student, my first online lesson.
Oh, subtle difference there. What have you brought along today that we could work at?
So I've brought along a study from Anderson, Opus 15. It's number 13 in F sharp major.
Right.
Also an excerpt, so from the Opera Norma, the Casta Diva.
Okay. So, and what would you like to start with? Hello, Sally. Thank you so much for turning up for this. You've just told me this is your first Zoom or online flute lesson ever.
Ever, yeah. With me being a student, my first online lesson.
Oh, subtle difference there. What have you brought along today that we could work at?
So I've brought along a study from Anderson, Opus 15. It's number 13 in F sharp major.
Right.
also an excerpt, so from the opera Norma, the Casta Diva.
Okay.
So,
And what would you like to start with?
I think the Anderson.
Okay. Fantastic. So this is going to be Anderson number 13, the one in F sharp major. Okay, off you go. Well, Sally, I have very little to say. Just like I thought might happen. Well done. It's marked Allegro con fuoco, and I suppose because it says con fuoco, that's why we can justify playing it pretty much relentlessly with a sostenuto sound, because normally my first instinct would be to say, oh, come on, let's make some shapes out of this. But, you know, the fact that it says fuoco, I still wonder if within fuoco you could be sort of in and out of, rather than sort of pressing the sostenuto sound, which is what you did brilliantly, you know. And maybe 2 years ago, maybe when we've been studying together, I would have said that's exactly what you need to do to iron out all the lumps and bumps. But now you've got that. So for the benefit of the people watching the lesson, rather than your benefit, you know, what I'm talking about is basically setting up the embouchure, locking on with your embouchure, and then directing a very consistent airstream through the scales. And Sally just demonstrated that beautifully. But the only thing I'm wondering is whether she could be more swirly. I hardly know whether I dare compete and try and by the way, what does demonstrate? What does condimperezione mean?
Karen, I actually don't know.
No, nor do I. So there we go. Who knows what that means? Let me have a little fiddle and see if we could still keep this fuoco. I don't know if we could sustain something more tempestuous. I'll tell you what it does remind me, though, is the accents. So let's just let me just tell those listening where the accent comes. Here. And do you remember I once said to you, a good rule of thumb for accents is to make sure the note before it, there's a little bit of daylight. You know, somehow that's been my rule of thumb with most accents. Before the written accent, the note before, if there is one prior, just put a little split second of daylight. Let's hear what it sounds like. It sort of gives us a moment to really throw the accent out. Can you try that for me? I don't know if it's a Zoom thing. I couldn't now put it under, I couldn't hear the gap. Put it under a microscope, Sally. Yeah, yeah, now let's go on to the second page, 3 lines from the bottom, and show me how that could work. In this particular bar, there's an accent at on the first semiquaver of each of the 4 crotchets. Let's see how that could work. Yeah, now, I don't know if I'm pleased with that. Can you hear those gaps? It does seem to have room for the accents to come through. One last time. Yeah, now without rhythmically altering it. Okay, and now forget I ever said it. Yeah, those accents are better. They're coming out better. You really have done great work on this study. And if there are 2 places on this study which you are never quite sure will be 100% and rock solid under pressure, could you tell me where one of them is, Sally? And let's talk about how to practice it.
Like a technical kind of insecurity.
Yeah, because there were a couple of little hiccups.
Yeah, in the middle of that second page.
Yeah.
Is always, I think as well, just because I've got that, the dynamics to think about as well, that it's almost harder, but kind of 6th line down.
Right.
6th, 7th line down, always kind of is the bit that's going to fall apart if anything is.
So could you isolate the very bar that you feel you may trip up over, and let's just spend 5 minutes talking about some practice methods. Could I hear it?
Yeah, I'm actually going to take a bar from the 8th line.
Okay.
First bar of the 8th line.
Thank you. Yeah. Of course, you played it immaculately. That is one of the things, actually. Sometimes, let's say we keep tripping up over a bar. So we take that bar, which is the sensible thing, and we put it under a microscope. And lo and behold, it plays beautifully. So it begs the question, what is it that comes before it that trips us up? So in that instance, what I would do is add a bar at a time from the previous. Let me just find where you were again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. So add the 4th crotchet of the previous bar a few times into that. Yeah. Good. Now 2 beats from the previous bar. Yeah, you're proving very difficult to make practice regimes for, because you sound immaculate. Go on, give me 3 beats prior to that tricky bar. Yeah, fine. Anyway, for the benefit of the others, that I would definitely build up. If the block you're isolating in isolation appears to work beautifully, just approach it beat at a time from prior to that. And have you gone down the route of doing the dotted rhythms practice method, Sally, or?
A little bit, in some places, not the whole thing.
Yeah. And do you want to demonstrate that? Do you want to demonstrate what that might be? It's not something I advocate, but it wasn't a trick question whether you do it. This is one method of practicing tricky passages using a dotted rhythm. Okay, now flip it. Yeah. Good. And then what tempo would you say you've finally got this up to? Have you been marking your tempos and grading them faster and faster each day as they were perfect?
No, I didn't. I maybe have not the best method of doing it. I do it with a metronome when I'm playing slowly, and when I want to play it at the speed that I want to play it, I leave the metronome.
Yeah. So, as you know, Sally, I would recommend that we always start from the hardest bar, the tempo that we can reliably and consistently play the hardest bar, or the bar we keep tripping up over. I go back to the beginning of the study, play the whole study at that speed, and checking that I don't trip up over the tricky bars. And then, if that's a success, notch the metronome up. And that's what you should do with all your technical passages that are difficult. Really keep a little grid of metronome markings and spend as long as you need to on each tempo metronome mark before moving on to the next one. Never move on to trying a fast one until the whole passage is uniformly clean. But Sally, I think you know that already. That is all I have to say about that study. Well done, you. Wickedly fantastic fingers.
Okay.
The other piece you brought is one of the most gorgeous tunes, and I hate that you think it's an excerpt. Let's forget that it's an excerpt.
Okay.
The introduction to the most beautiful aria by Bellini from his opera called Norma, and it's called Casta Diva, and it's really, I think, a sublime solo. So let's never call it an excerpt again. Wouldn't it be nice if we could not think of excerpts as being excerpts as well? Wouldn't it be nice if we just remembered that they were written as bits of music, and probably the poor composers are turning in their graves when they know we agonize over them. We have to try to remember they're beautiful bits of music. Okay, let's go. You have 3 bars rest before you start. Do you know what happens in those, Sally?
It's like string arpeggios.
Yeah. Can you give us a notion of how they go so that we can already sense a tempo before you begin?
3, 1.
Lovely. That's going to be gorgeous. absolutely gorgeous. You're on fire, Sally. You play very, very beautifully. Beautiful. The accompaniment, it comes as a bit of a shock, depending on the conductor. But on the whole, because the accompaniment is on the whole, that breaking into 4 in a bar is going to stay pretty straight. Nobody tends to give us much room. It's another story altogether, quite rightly. Once the coloratura soprano comes in, she can do what she wants, and then the orchestra will bend. But it's perfectly justified with the first presentation of the theme for it to be presented like a simple prayer. It is a prayer. It's a prayer for peace. And it gets presented very simply. And I have had a shock every time I've played this at quite how unrhythmic I am. Because the orchestra is in quavers. And of course, in our beautiful melody, we've got a couple of demi-semi-quavers and some semi-quavers. And we really need to lock in.
Okay.
So in the first place, we have to take great care. I'm not suggesting you put your metronome onto quavers, but I am suggesting that you keep a pretty careful ear in your own head for the triplets. Maybe play it through with a recording and really learn how rigid it is. Now, that said, the first note, can you remind everybody how the first bar goes? Off you go. So that everyone knows what I'm talking about. So for me, the issues that raises, and they're all debatable because the way you're playing is exquisite, and anybody who turns up and hears you play that will be thrilled. We could grow through the first note.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting it has to be with dynamic, but it certainly could be with your vibrato. Remember, we're in opera now, and it's pretty scary putting this to video, saying things that I'm going to say, but I'm going to. You know, really, when it comes to vibrato, I think anything seems to go. And we can be operatic as well. I feel like we perhaps break some of our rules, our vibrato rules, when it comes to opera. So starting with none or a tiny bit, starting to speed it up, narrower and narrower, and just at the point you want to time your vibrato so that everybody knows exactly when you're going to move off that note, because your vibrato has dictated that moment. So you have the idea of the pulse in your head, 4 and 3 and 4. And it would be right there.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's not because we're superficially trying to impose this. You should feel that growth through the note. And then the only thing you can do is move off it. Try that. Come in either with no tongue or by withdrawing the tongue from between the lips. So creep in. Okay, Sally, so which note are we going to? It's very obvious. In those 2 bars, where are we heading to?
The first of the second.
That's right. Now, show that with your vibrato. Let's make sure that that note has an arrival with your vibrato. Don't leave it bald. Off you go once more. Zoom wasn't on our side there. You were slightly misrepresented, but we'll go on anyway. It sounds to me, Sally, like now we're talking about vibrato. You're not so comfortable, as many flute players aren't, with the fast vibrato. Now let's remember that fast vibrato has to be very narrow. Okay, so do you remember when we used to practice with our metronome on 60, and we would practice 1 push, 2 wah, wah, with our vibrato, then 2 pushes to that 3 da 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 dee da da, all the way up to 6 and 7. And what we noticed was that the slower the vibrato, the lower it is produced. It is when we do a nice 1 1, it's nice and low somewhere in the diaphragm region, and by the time we're vibrating 6 per crotchet, it's very high and somewhere up in the throat. And I would suggest, if you feel so inclined, that you revisit just for 5 minutes a day that vibrato exercise. And whilst you're going to practice it academically, once you've practiced it with your academic hat on, be sure to put that academic hat to one side and use it for musical inflection reasons. The second issue that your first 2 bars raises, we can play this very, very quietly, this solo, very, very quietly. In fact, the quieter it is, the more tender and heartfelt it is. It's not the soprano, when she gets her version, wears her heart on her sleeve and goes swooping up into the 3rd register. We can be much more intimate, and with that comes the issue of keeping the intonation up. We finally hit the home key of F major. There, and we need to have made sure that with all these lovely bright notes, that by the time we arrive back at F, we've kept our posture high, we've nothing sunk, and we've got enough air left to make sure we arrive sufficiently high in that intonation to be on a nice upper side of F major.
Okay.
So before you begin this time, Sally, let's find our tonality in F major. Make up anything where you sing a nice mezzo forte, comfortable voice. Find in your ears what your tonality is for F major. When you've done that, go to the excerpt, start nice and quietly, and keep tabs on where the pitch is. Because we don't have much time, well done, extremely well done. Looking at the the 4th beat of our first bar. That C, because it's the highest note of our phrase, you are going to have to work very hard for that not to be the most important note of the phrase.
Yeah.
As we've already discussed, it's a 4th lower than that, the G. So once more, just those 2 bars, and have your uppermost thought with that part of it for this time. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Looking ahead to these phrases, 2 phrases begin the same. So that's the first one. So we're definitely going to the A, bombardee. Now the next one goes to the A, but it goes further this time. So let's be sure to play it with some restraint. Listen. It's really worth almost writing on your page in whatever your shorthand is, you know, which are the less important notes and which is the most important note, and then really work hard to make sure that is what you're producing. So my shorthand, you know, my shorthand for the less important notes is like a little teacup,
Yeah,
a little U. So it'll be ba-da-dee, that has a nice line on it for emphasis. And then da-da, you would have a little cup on it. And then the next D, ba-da-da-da-dee, another cup. Da-ya, then that would have a tenuto on. And then you have to work hard in spite of how high and therefore strong a note is, to tell us where you feel the shaping of the phrases. So go from the first of those Fs. Beautiful, Sally. Absolutely beautiful. And I think you're using your trill key.
For the D, yeah.
Now,
Figure it out.
yeah. And the same in Bizet's entr'acte. Remember?
Yeah.
Somehow, you know, the ear can just hear that slightly sort of dull trill key. Sally, do you know what? Nicole begged me to keep this to 30 minutes, and that means we have to wind up. And I'm so sorry, because I would love everybody to hear more of your playing. You sound fabulous.
Thank you, Karen.
You are most welcome. I hope I've reminded you of some of the old tricks for how to get
Yeah. It's been
how
so
to approach things. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Hey, Camille.
Hi, Karen.
Thanks for doing this for me, and welcome to anyone watching. This is Camille Curtis, an ex-student of mine. And Camille, what can we have a lesson on today?
Can we have a lesson on the Mozart D major flute quartet, the first movement?
Absolutely. Had you hoped to be having a performance of this soon?
You know, I hadn't, but it's been something that I've been wanting to do for a while with a quartet, so it'd be really useful to have a lesson on it. Plus, I have some students learning it, so it's a good one to brush up on.
Lovely. And have you ever had a chance to play it through with a quartet?
No, never had the chance. I'd love
Okay.
to. I've heard it performed live in France, but I've never played it.
Okay. Well, so this is the first movement of Mozart's quartet in D major. Let's crack on. Camille, when we had a private chat beforehand, you said you were feeling rusty. And from what I can tell on Zoom, you sound in great shape.
Oh,
So
okay.
please try not to beat yourself up. This is terribly exposed, this. I mean, it's, you know, it's as exposed, if not more exposed than the concertos, you know. And you're doing a really nice job. Your sound is perky and gorgeous and full of character. You sound energized. You sound quite rhythmic. And you've got some nice things going on down in the bottom octave. So loads of cool things going on. The biggest shock when we come to play this with the quartet, Camille, is the fact that usually there are quavers going on. I mean, I've got the score in front of me. I mean, pretty much the whole time, suddenly, like with the concertos, the whole thing is subdivided. And how to practice that rhythmic discipline in, I mean, obviously you're going to stick the metronome on. You know, the question is, what quality practice do you do with your metronome? What I'm concluding from some of my teaching, Camille, is that sometimes I say, have you practiced this with a metronome? And it's a question of, yeah, I'm sure the metronome was on, but were you using it as a way of instilling rhythmic pulse and characterization? Anyway, I'll be specific in a second. One thing I want you to consider is the last notes of some of your phrases. For example, the first time this comes is after letter B. That B natural, you didn't realize, I'm sure, otherwise you wouldn't have done it, but it was too chipped, too clipped, was how you were doing it. Nurture the last notes. You're doing the tapers, beautiful tapers, but in your endeavor to taper, you must make sure that you nurture the note that you've come away from. And obviously that takes some chops. So the way to practice that is why not then hold the resolving note with a long pianissimo and a long tail to it. Try that so that you know where it is on the lips and you're not just cutting it off because that's the easy thing to do. Now just practice the A sharp to the B with a good diminuendo, and then let's take the B for 8 counts. Yeah, let's take it for longer. Let's really find where that lovely point of vanish is. And just before you're about to vanish, hold it and learn where that is, muscular-wise, on your embouchure. That's a lovely bit of practice, Camille. That's a lovely bit of practice. Do that once more, and then without me interrupting again, then repeat the phrase as is.
Go on.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So you understand the point of that. I mean, it's in your endeavor to do that mini diminuendo, it's just the simplest thing, just to snap the note off. And it requires so much more intention to nurture the last note. Camille, obviously, any separate note in this first movement, as in lots of music, has either got a staccato on it or it hasn't. That doesn't mean that every staccato note has to be uniformly short. I mean, obviously, a staccato semiquaver is going to be shorter than a staccato quaver, and a staccato quaver is going to be shorter than a staccato crotchet. Let me be specific. Where did it worry me? I mean, if you look to before D, I'm looking into where we go into this murky moment harmonically here. Now there, I would, you know, for all we know, these staccatos anyway are editorial. I would work with the fact that we've gone into the nether regions of something like D minor briefly, you know, from D major, and I would lengthen them, I would brush them. So what is printed, for those of you who can't see Camille's music, obviously, is da 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 da. And what I'm suggesting to her is that they are separate, but they're brushed. And I can assure you that's what the string players will be doing with their bow. Da da bom 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 bom. Do you want to try that, Camille? So that's one interpretation at that moment of the short notes, brushed. Now, what's your rhythm? Let's just practice. Why don't we practice some brushed quavers? Let's do nice. Now take the trill out of that bar and play da ya dum bum dum 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 bum.
Trill out.
Exactly what I meant. Do that once more, and then after that, pop in the trill as well.
And is this quite loud still?
Sorry, Camille?
Is this quite loud still at this point?
Loud?
Yes.
Oh, yes. This is fruity. This is very fruity at this point.
And put
And
trills in.
now with the trills. Once more. Good. Now go on to the quavers on the next A's, and look in for those people who are watching this as a demo lesson, that the phrasing, we're going to have 5 repeated A's. There's a legato, and underneath the legato are staccato printed. And this, I really barely want any daylight. You could consider this a misterioso marking. You know, really and this is a very intense, almost operatic moment. Let me hear what you've got there, Camille. Yes, but though your crotchets, the A, G sharp, A, have also got the slur with the dots. Play them much longer than that. Dum, dum, dum. Yes, better.
Exercise will come in handy again. The brush, the resolution one.
Well, at least we've now raised, I now want you to go back through the piece and not just take the staccato marks literally. I want you to interpret them. That was his only way of saying he wanted them separately, and they mustn't all be uniformly pecked. Then when we get this very long passage between D and E, how many bars? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, nearly 10 bars of semiquavers. Let me just remind everyone else which bit I'm talking about. And that passage that rolls on. Of course, there you could work with the length of the note to build the tension. While it's super quiet at the beginning, I would keep it super spat out. Yeah? And then as you begin to build up, begin to fill the notes out a little more. I need to practice that. And then next few bars as we crescendo. And really get longer and longer and longer. I don't need to hear you do that because I want to look at a couple more things. Camille, going on.
Oh, no, did I?
Now that's a full crotchet.
Mm-hmm.
You went the ba-ba. Let me hear you do that. Really, both times. Good. Now going back to the very first thing I said to you, which was the thing that comes as a shock when we get to play with three fabulous string players. Usually, and I've found this both coaching it and when I've come to play it with some lovely string players, it's our lack of rhythmic discipline. So if we just use those two bars, so it's a simple figure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, da 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 da. What somewhere in there you need to have in mind, in your head, quavers, because there are chugging quavers in the accompaniment. Jum 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 jum. So the four semis mustn't run. The four semis are comprised of two quavers. Dear dada, dear dada, 1, 2, bum bum, dear dada, dum bum 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 bum. That's an example. And then don't throw away da ba ba, dum bum bum. So let's count yourself in a bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then play and see if you can sound slightly funky with your 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay?
Out loud?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
1 and 2 and. Do you know what, Camille? That was so much better.
Okay.
You'll hear that when you watch this back. Do exactly the same exercise again, and thank you for being such a good sport. So I want you to make it clear to those watching this video how we've broken these two bars down into its rhythmic quavers, and you've got that set up in a pulse beforehand. Off you go.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 3 and 4 and.
Lovely. You did a really beautiful demo of that. Thank you. Let's go back to the beginning. And so already the other strings, you come in with the cello. Bomb. He does a lovely big sweeping down bow, like this, and you sort of take off. And the other string players, they play quavers in the opening bar. So under your breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and. I'd like to hear you say that, and then feel the quavers as you set off, just under your breath. Give yourself enough time to breathe as well. Very, very nice. Can you go on once more?
1.
Yeah. What? This isn't very nice flute writing, this, is it? Somehow you've still got to make that sound like part of the melody rather than some random two-note tonguing exercise. I'm sorry to be so brutal, but I mean, let's practice it once melodically with a big slur over it. Just do that for me, Camille. Yes, and this time let's tongue the E cleanly. So sorry I said put a slur over the whole thing. Slur over the first bar and then a tongue. And listen to, well, you know what I'm going to say, Camille. You learned with me for long enough. Listen to your tone as you play through those scalic passages. And don't throw away ba-da-da-da-dum. Let me hear that last bar. Lovely. Again, hold 2 bars. Lovely, beautiful. Now let's make up, having done that, now let's make up, let's start alternating the last 2 bars. Start making up an exercise where you alternate the legato with the tongue. Yeah, good. Now let's go from the beginning. Yeah. Okay. I will need you to pop a metronome on that, but we won't bring that into the equation, the Zoom equation. Now, let me just find any other pencil markings. I don't want to have missed anything out. What else did I write in here? Nothing in particular. Why don't we work, as we've started on some articulation, let's take the passage before E, the long tongued passage. You managed really well with your breathing, by the way.
Thanks, just.
Yeah, I thought you did really well. It's always a struggle, this. And ask your string players to keep it down at this point. Let's go directly on the passage of semiquavers, straight on the semiquavers. Okay, 1 second with me. Let's be super secretive and intimate at this point. And in fact, I know your editorial, the copy you sent me prior to the lesson, the bar before this, you've got a printed crescendo. I would absolutely diminuendo.
That's what I was
All right,
intending.
and then really call it pianissimo. Something very special, something very secretive. Draw everybody back in to your playing at this point. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so first of all, I will say that Zoom doesn't do tonguing any favors. It is very difficult for me to tell exactly what you're doing. But why don't you tell everyone what you know? I will ask you to use as a method to practice this now. What will I now say could be better?
Tone.
Of course it'll be the tone. You know, all our articulated passages, our brain just seems to go to the tongue, and it seems to forget that first and foremost, that sound. So even in the pianissimo, be working on the sound. Let me hear you play that bar, 2 bars, pianissimo with an electrifyingly focused sound.
All slurred.
Yes, please. Let me see if on this wretched Zoom I can hear you play super pianissimo. Now put a really long, almost imperceptible tongue on that as a first part of your practice. Now play it very short and crisp and keep touch exactly with the way you're producing that sound. And now tongue on 1 note, tongue on the C sharp. Let's really hear how firm that double tongue is. And now say to yourself 1 and 2 and 3 and then tongue.
On the C sharp.
Yeah.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
Yes.
Like the last in the middle.
Yeah. You see, it's this rhythmic, I know we call it rhythmic discipline, but it is rhythmic. It is rhythmic discipline, but it gives the music so much more structure. Well, let's make up an exercise. Can you yeah, I bet you've clocked that. Yeah. Are you sure you're not rushing?
Yeah, I was just about to count myself.
Okay, once more. 2, 3, 4. Good. Now let's play what's printed. Now, why don't you make up an exercise for your last bar? Do you know what? I need to practice. Why don't you, let's just go on a loopy practice under legato and check those fingers are super crisp.
2, 7.
Very, 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 very nice. Now check the double tongue just on a repeated D. Now put the two together and play what's printed.
No, no.
Again. Yeah. Yeah. That's a little bit of Tavenel and Gobert EJ7 in D major. So you could use EJ7 up to this tempo in D major and then start introducing the articulation. Then you've got a double whammy in one bit of practice. You're working on the Mozart whilst working on your technique and vice versa. So just let's agree, your tempo is very, very good. Have you put a metronome on it yet, Camille?
Yeah, it's roughly between 125 and 130.
That's quite a wide margin. 125 or 138, okay.
Oh,
Well,
130, not 138, 130. 130.
Oh, good. I was going to say.
No, not that big a margin. That's quite big.
Yeah. Now stick that on and let's just work on the first 4 bars as a last thing. Yeah, I like 125. That sounds very nice, Camille.
Beginning?
Yeah, just the opening 4 bars, and really use this to lock in with the metronome as if it was your string players. Yep, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Why did you react like that? What?
Because there were 2 places it went a bit. Oh, actually,
can you identify that a little further? Can you teach yourself? Tell me.
Yeah, it was between the first and second bar, and then in between the second and third bar. So it's at the ends of those bars, actually, interestingly enough, on the 4th beat. That's why I was kind of rushing on. Okay, and if we could push that analysis slightly further, but I can't think. I think it's just this question of really feeling this and keeping it almost foot tapping stuff. 2, 3, 4, bum, bum, so that it doesn't become a rigidity. It doesn't become something to hold you in place. It becomes something so funky with such a good groove that you can't shift from it. That's my endeavour. Yeah. One last time, and then we'll call it a day. Cool.
Oh, I thought that was very much better.
Yeah, that's it. I like the idea of the groove. That kind of, because then you feel like you're with a string quartet, actually.
and in terms of, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Cami. The word groove also, I just mean in a place where it doesn't feel a restraint to have to be rhythmic because you're so in it. You know, really feeling that. And then you get with the string players and you find and suddenly it all works, you know. Anyway, if this is your idea of not being in shape, I beg to differ. I think you sound super. And make up your exercises around your articulation. Don't forget about your tone in all your articulation. Don't play uniform lengths of notes. So all the staccato don't mean one length. They mean a length of short note according to what's going on at the time. Revisit working with the metronome, and I would say you're cooking very nicely. Good to see you. Thanks for being such a good sport.
My pleasure. Thank you. No, thank you so much.
Qatar.
Cool.
Bye. Hi, Ben. Thanks very much for doing this little lesson with me today. And so everybody, I'm sure Nicole's introduced Ben already, but this is Ben. He's had a few lessons with me already. He's a very advanced player, and most of the time I don't have much to say to him, but I'll try and dig some things out now. So remind me, what would you like to play today, Ben?
I've got the Bach C major on the stand and also the Lieberman soliloquy.
Lovely. Let's start with a touch of the first movement of the Bach. We've had a lesson on this already, so it'll be interesting for me to see whether you took on board any of the suggestions I made. When you're ready, Ben, off you go.
Sorry, sticky key.
Okay, bravo. And you obviously have given a lot of thought to line, which is something we talked about last time. One thing I forgot to tell you last lesson, this is my mistake. Before we go to the presto, never breathe until you've made the cadence, until you've completed the cadence. I know it's very tempting because it feels like we could sneak one in before the trill, but we should cadence first. Could you just pop that in and just run that by me? Yes, good. And then when we make these breaths after cadences, normally we're really anxious to stay in time, but let's never rob the modulation. Do you understand? Let's make sure we've really arrived. Don't apologize for the arrival. Do you hear me all right, Ben? Is there an issue?
Yeah.
No, you can hear me.
Yeah, no, it's fine, yeah.
Okay. Sorry for that wrong note. I mean, obviously, it's also I just want you to feel convinced that you can modulate into that C major, be with it, and then into the new tempo. Try one more time. Yeah. And then let's decide. I think this presto should go like the clappers. No, I do, and I think actually it's strangely easier. I would be light, and I would be. Let's go for, as if we've cadence. Let's go immediately on the presto, and let's pick the speed up. And Ben, I want you to be aware of this mannered. You're doing long, short with your bass notes again.
Okay.
Now, I know we want to emphasize the bass line, but there's other ways of doing it less mannered than that. One second. I think it's a question of orientating yourself in the low register. So getting the geography of inside your mouth really locked into the bottom register and just popping the top notes out effortlessly without shifting your embouchure. So we're staying as if the whole passage was down there, just popping out the top notes. And not altering the embouchure. And that should give you more confidence not to hammer out the bottom by lengthening it. Sorry, that was so wordy. Try directly from the presto. Yeah. Now just play me a couple of E, Fs and Gs, legato, down in the bottom register, and make sure you're really high enough.
Okay.
I know you want to dig down to ensure that we punch the bottom notes out, but keep an ear open for your intonation. Let me hear those three notes full length. And now play the octave above. Now the lower octave. Now add a gentle tongue to the low register now, still with those nice slow notes. Good. Now roll that a few more times, gradually getting shorter. Stay nice and bright in the mouth, right up into the upper palate. That should help keep the intonation up. Excellent. Now we'll keep them short and just literally pop the top octave out. With no great shifts on the face at all. Good, very much better. Another detail, in terms of looking towards the end of this movement, when we get this long passage, you could breathe right there. Did you see? So that's after the second crotchet, before the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 before the end, after the second crotchet.
Okay.
It feels very natural to me. See how you like it. Go from the beginning of a bar and a half earlier than that. No, Ben, after the second beat.
Sorry, second.
And really enjoy the cascade down each time. Now you're going to offer us some more, just a slight noodle at the end. You should do some, enjoy that moment. Ben, if I give you the license now to pick the speed up and be fairly frisky with this movement, remember something I'm talking to you about a lot, which is rhythmic characterization. So as soon as you let it run away without funkiness, in other words, without rhythmic discipline, you lose the audience, because you just kind of lose us, whatever you keep us in a groove. So once more, the same thing. And one last thing, which you're so bored of hearing me say, keep your mind's principal preoccupation should be tone, not tongue.
So from the presto or from...
No, let's just go from that last passage of running semiquavers again. So rhythmic discipline and tone. Very nice, Ben. That's coming on really, really nicely. Really nicely. The other piece you wanted to play was the Lieberman's soliloquy. And I'd love to hear how that's come on since I last saw you. This is the unaccompanied Lieberman's solo soliloquy.
It'll help if it doesn't fall off the stand.
Well, you know what? It's only a flute lesson. It's not an audition. It's only me. Yeah. Ben, do you mind?
No, not at all.
That has improved considerably. The opening is absolutely beautiful. Could I just point out the rhythm isn't correct here, Ben? Do you see that?
Mm.
If you blocked out where the crotchets were, those are simply two quavers. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, you've improved this enormously. Do you know something I've noticed is when you go 7 lines down towards the bottom of the page, when we then have the same theme as the opening, but this time it's up an octave and it says espressivo. Now, I know you're going to think, oh, I can't win, because last time I said to you, I found the opening with your tone rather bland, and you could have electrified it in some way, which you just have done beautifully. But what I'm wondering is, now, how do we make the differentiation with when he asks us specifically to be espressivo?
Yeah.
So that's my first point. And what I would suggest is that you adopt the cold sound at the opening, but you don't adopt the bland sound. So still work at biting down with the top lip. So all of that you've done really nicely, and keep the intensity of the speed of the air. That will keep the sound electrified. And then we'll introduce much more expression and vibrato when we go up the octave after this first fast passage. One more thing. You need to enjoy the fact that Lieberman has said to you, adagio con rubato. And rubato is to give and then to take and to give. And for every forward, there must be a backward, and vice versa. And you should think, wow, for once, this is marvelous. The composer is going to allow me to shape this organically and call it rubato. Now, as an exercise, show me what you can do with overdoing the interpretation of rubato this time. Let's just concentrate on that one task for the opening 4 or 5 gestures. That's so much better. That's so much better. And it also then it felt like you take us from, I don't know, it traveled, there was flow, there was shape. All of that is much better. See how much you have to exaggerate it though, Ben, in order that we feel the forward and then the backwards. I love this arrival at the E in the second gesture. Now, when you then have the next E, revisit it with further intensity. The fact that the composer comes back to another E. And then this time you think, I wonder if he's going to do it again. So sometimes that's why it's worth thinking about the composer's tools. So he goes to the E with a marked crescendo, then he tries another approach to the E again, more intensity, then he looks like he's going to use the same approach, and he backs off and goes to a D natural. And you could reflect that in your colour. Show me what I've just talked about too long for. Then just try that last one again and put deliberately in your head an arrow forward. Ba-dum, 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 ba-ba-ba. Try that, see if you like it.
Ah, no, keeping it wrong.
Yeah. And are you going to aspire ultimately? You will, Ben. You've got great lungs. You just didn't prepare properly. You didn't start that last lick, the 9 lick, with enough air in your lungs to ensure one breath only to the top. Now, the way to practice that, let's just take it from the last breath and prove to yourself that when you give yourself time and you concentrate on filling up that time, you can get all the way to the end. Let's make that the first step. Good. We'll talk about fingers in a second. Now stick the previous gesture on, all right, and go all the way to the end. And you know how much air you're going to need to deliver that ending in one breath. Excellent, Ben. You're doing a great job. Now you can see the way I'm doing this. Add the previous gesture. Think, concentrate on that tank, concentrate on your tank of air. Most excellent, most excellent. Be sure not to splice that top F sharp off with a choke. Enough of a ring. Yeah, we've talked about this before. Not a choke, not a ah. I know it's got a dagger on it, but for me, I want to hear it. Let Zoom show us it does reverb. Just let it ring a touch. Okay, now stick the previous 6 gesture on. Very good, Ben. And now add the whole thing. So I liked the breathing you did this second performance. Let's breathe after the G trill. Very, very nice. You must have enjoyed, you know, that's an enjoyable thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, when you stick the previous accelerando onto that, you need to have your mind uppermost on making sure you replenish the tank of air in readiness for that. I like the way so we have 2 runs with 6s in. Then we have a run of 7, then we have a run of 8, 9, another 8, etc., etc. And at least in your practice, I want you to have broken it down into that. So the 6s, let's break them down into 2 groups of 3. So in your mind, you know, whether you're going to break the 7 down into a 3 and a 4, know what you're breaking it down into for the purpose of your practice, so that you know that every single note is there. And then the very last gesture, I haven't counted how many notes there are on this. I'm going to do it now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 notes. You need in your practice to have broken this down into something that makes sense to you. And they're like little, what do we call them? Stepping stones on the path. So that's not 18 random notes that you string together with your fingers crossed. It's smaller numbers added together that you know what they are and you know where they begin. So let's start off with 4s. So let's make it 3, 4 4s and a 2. Now this is for the organization of your practice. Stop looking at it as 18, as I say, break it down. So can you show me, or can you demonstrate what you've understood by the last 18 run?
Oh no, I'm putting it really flat.
That's not quite right, is it?
No,
If you write a tenuto, I mean, that's what I would do. I need visual stepping stones as well. So on the D, on the A, the E flat, the A natural, and then a little tour for the last E, F onto the F sharp. Once more. Yeah. So let me remind you of something I may have, you know, my method for learning an awkward scale like that. First of all, I'm going to organize it so I know exactly what it's made up of. You could comprise it of a different configuration if you want, but in your head, know how you've broken it down and what you've broken it down into. I want at this point to remind you of my 3 times correctly rule. Do you remember that for every once you enter into your finger pattern and into your brain cells an incorrect sequence of notes, in order to remove that from your memory and your muscle memory, you must play 3 times correctly, perfectly. That's a really solid rule, really solid. So it's always worth playing 3 times super slow to ensure the information has been put on the brain's memory disk correctly. Do that for me now and let me hear you thrust the rhythm out. 4 groups of 4 and a 2 onto the F sharp. Very nice. Again. Last time. Excellent, excellent. You've no idea how, and if you were preparing for anything now and it was the night before the gig or the exam or whatever the thing was you were preparing for, if you decide to luxuriate and have a run through at home and a couple of technical passages go awry, before you go to bed that night, play the runs that failed you under a little bit of performance pressure 3 times super slowly. Just put the right info in there and under your muscle memory here, and that will do you a lot more favors. You'll stand more chance of reaching for the correct version once the adrenaline's flowing. And just to remind you of another method we could use if you find that still doesn't nail that run reliably, you could start from the top few notes and then bolt on 1 extra. Do you want to demonstrate so that everyone start with 3 notes into the F sharp? Now hold on. If I were a real madam, which I am, I would just remind you at this point, do each one 3 times correctly.
Okay.
Let's be tedious about this. Now add another note. Thank you. Before we lose any of our audience, I think they will have got the message. Okay, before we finish, let's just look over the page and let me hear how the molto lento is going. You were doing this so beautifully the other day. I'm sorry, I don't mean to put the pressure on, but I'd love to hear it again. You really were. Beautiful, Ben. You do that extremely well, and I want you to pat yourself on the back for that. If I had to make a comment, I think I would just say, I mean, 40, the tempo marking is 40. Let me just, I'm worried that we'll get too bogged down.
Yeah.
Bum, be da da dum, da da dum, bum, be da da. So you've got all the control in the world. You've just proved that. Have some sense of momentum and flow and knowing where you're going. And then when he goes from 4s into 3s, that it will make greater sense. You could even think in minims, Ben.
Yeah.
Da 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 bum be da da da, and then when we come to the triplets, it can be ba dee da dee da dee da. Try that once. Very, very nice. Very, very nice. You've proved my point exactly. And the only other thing which you probably don't realize you're doing at the minute is you're not keeping the 4th quaver where printed staccato.
Okay. Yeah.
Just listen to yourself do that once more, and let's honor what Lieberman popped there as an instruction for us. Beautiful. Yeah. You know, I'm a bit of a stickler for, I mean, we know that isn't editorial, you know, so where we are lucky enough to have music composed by relatively recent composers, we can more or less rely on the markings, and then we should honor them, or excuse me, interpret them as much as we can. Okay, just before we finish, why don't you play me from the Allegro down at the bottom of the page? Just as a bit of a treat for us. And then we'll call it a day.
Ah.
Thank you, Ben. You're a real brick. You could have said, no, Karen, I'm not going to do that right now, quite frankly. Thanks for doing that. And we will, if you please remind me next lesson, I'd like to start from there.
Okay.
And I think you know some of the ways I'd like you to practice that. Can I just make one parting observation?
Yes.
Occasionally look at that passage without the flute and try, because I think our brain is so tangled up with the notes and the odd accidentals, we forget what we want to do musically. And remember how I've had you do this before, Ben? Act it out once to yourself, and kind of clock what you do before we bring this into it with its complications. Because what you do as a musician when you just stand here and conduct it or sing it or say it is you tap into your natural musicianship. Unfortunately, when we bring this into it, that can get suppressed while our brain sorts all the complexities of this out. So it's worth reminding yourself how you would like to play that once you've sorted out the technique. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been a good lesson, Ben. You've been a real sport. Thank you ever so much. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Brilliant, thank you.
Happy practicing.
Thank you so much, Karen. Was that weird watching yourself there through that? Or we have to unmute yourself, Karen.
There we go. Did you
Hello.
ask me, Nicole, was I watching?
Yes, was it strange to watch yourself teaching?
Actually, fairly horrific. That's not something I want to make a habit of.
Bless you. No, you were absolutely wonderful. It was so lovely to watch it, and I could see some lovely chat going on in the chat window. I think everybody had a great time. We've got lots of questions to ask you. So the first one, just wanted to tell everybody about the differing sound qualities. Of course, on Zoom does depend on people's devices and internet speeds and things like that. So that's why sometimes some contestants' sounds were better than others. But I think we'll all agree that they all played fantastically. So that was great. Thank you to Sally and Camille and Ben for putting yourselves out there for our benefit. We're very, very grateful. So first question, it's an anonymous question. Somebody just wondering why you don't advocate the dotted rhythm practice for harder passages, and what would you suggest instead?
Ah, well, I've got a million other methods. I find that it can make for a jerky end result. But for me personally, has never resulted in da 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 da. It's just a thing, and it seems to encourage jolty movements on the flute and percussive fingers. There are other methods. So I talked about starting from the hardest nugget, and then adding one note on prior to it and building up the tough nugget with notes prior to it. That's one way of doing it. Building loops where you go round and round. So if there's a tricky passage of 6 notes, turn it into a loop, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and then go round and round, and then shift it by 1 note. So you start on the 2nd note, keep the loop the same, and by shifting the emphasis 1 note at a time, we shift where the difficulty is, and slow practice.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Now we've got a question. Where have I put it? It's from somebody who is a middle-aged student who's about grade 6 or 7 level. So she says, far less experienced than the gorgeous Sally, who was playing when she sent this message. She says her question's very basic, but I'm sure you'd still love to answer it, Karen. She's struggling to play light staccato and gets very different advice where to place her tongue. She says, I huff and my sound is fine huffing, but it sounds heavy when I add tongue. Should the tongue be placed at the arch of my mouth or in the upper jaw behind the front teeth or at the front? What are your thoughts on that?
Do you know what I'd say? Forget about the tongue, and in fact, leave the tongue out altogether to start with, and just use your diaphragm. Much like you're panting. And once you can be sure that you can produce a quick, short sound, like little coughs or blowing out the candle on your birthday cake, then just tidy it up with wherever feels natural with your tongue, with the tiniest little touch from the tongue, either straight onto the teeth or between the teeth and the upper palate, that tiny bit of skin joined between teeth and the upper palate. But don't forget that the tongue on its own does not produce a noise. You have to blow. So keep your head first and foremost with the blowing and the air.
Thank you. Great. Okay. We have another question. Somebody was wondering if you could address how to relax your cheeks when playing a strenuous piece and feel that you're not paying enough attention to them. And that doesn't quite make sense to me. No. Does it make sense to you, that?
Yeah, kind of makes sense to me. Oh, I'm giving it some thought. Just hold on a second. If your cheeks aren't relaxed, oh gosh, it might be that your jaw is clenched. Go back to the junction at the top of your ears, where the junction hangs where your jaw hangs naturally, if it wasn't glued together with tendons, and keep it soft and hanging low. That might unlock some facial tension. And failing that, imagine you're blowing a balloon up and inflating your cheeks, and gradually make the hole bigger and introduce an embouchure whilst keeping the cheeks inflated. It won't produce any sound, but it'll remind you what it feels like to blow with inflated, relaxed cheeks.
you very much, Karen. Now we have a question from, excuse me if I pronounce this wrong, Leif Engström. And Leif is asking, my question is regarding ways to give my tone different colours. How do you practice tonal painting? That's a nice phrase, isn't it? What anatomical aspects are important to consider? Jaws, lips, the mouth cavity, the tongue, vocal cords, sinuses. Physical aspects such as angles between the embouchure hole and lips, direction of air, speed. It sounds like he knows it already. It's great. Verbal templates such as vocals. So in Swedish, which I presume Leif must be, R, U, E, E, O. Did I do that right, Leif? You have suggestion of textbook studies to practice. How's my Swedish, Karen?
Textbook studies, I'd keep them nice and simple. I'd go straight to Marcel Moy's 24 melodies, and I'd start with the opening one, the simplest of tunes with the smallest of intervals in the most comfortable register of the flute. And I would actually ask yourself, okay, for this run through, I want to produce a laser sound, no air. And then I would investigate, like Leif said, vowel sounds, exactly how much pressure you're using from the top lip. And also, the one thing he didn't mention was, where is your tongue in your mouth? Is it nice and low at the back of your mouth? And is the upper palate high, cheekily high, really high? That impacts a lot on the type of colour we're making. But if you want to practice your colours, keep the tunes super simple. And lastly, take all the vibrato off, because the vibrato just confuses the issue.
Yes, I suppose you make a pure sound then.
Yeah.
These one as a treat at the end is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got it's rather a big question, so perhaps you could sort of give us a shortish answer to it from Angel Pareja Francisco. Again, apologies if I said that wrong. Any tips about how to face difficult excerpts like Prokofiev's Classical Symphony or Voliere? I'm a violinist, you see, so I don't know all these flute excerpts. I'm in some of them. In an audition, in terms of tempo, real fingerings or not, mental preparation. What about those really, really difficult ones? How do you prepare for them?
Well, like you said, that's a really big question. I mean, that's a couple of lessons worth. There's a loads of issues in there. I wonder, Nicole, do you think she was talking about nerves specifically?
Well, I think, I mean, definitely sort of, should you be going with the tempo? This is what I read from this question. The tempo that's actually marked. Do you have to go up to that speed? Do you have to do the fingerings and the part? How do you not freak out if it's really hard and you're thinking, I can't manage?
Yeah.
How
at the risk of making this sound really super simple and not useful, this is not meant to be not useful. You know, I would imagine if you feel like you've had so many lessons and so said this and so said that, and it's too fast or it's faster, you don't know what you're doing. If I were you, I would hear the excerpt in your head before you deliver it. Know how you think it should sound. Gosh, it's such a big question. Just don't forget that it's music. You know, should l'après-midi be in one breath or shouldn't it? Well, of course, if you can do it exquisitely with a ravishing sound, projecting a ravishing sound in one breath, of course, do it in one breath. Otherwise, seduce your panel with the most exquisite sound that you can make, a projecting exquisite sound. Let's not get too bogged down in the do's and don'ts. Let's remember that the composer wrote the music because he was inspired to give it to our instrument, to the flute. And at the end of the day, make sure it's music. And obviously all the other things, there's just too many of them to go into. I can't generalize. I'm sorry.
No, that's fair.
One
Probably one for a bigger conversation that time. And by the way, if any of you do want some one-to-one time with Karen, you can book an online lesson with her. If you've got nothing else to do at the moment, just go to the musicalorbit.com site and you'll find her page there. So then we have a question actually again from Angel. Which piece of advice would you give to students ending their studies in these weird times? You know, coming out of lockdown, suddenly finished college. How has the world changed in the music world changed, in your opinion, Karen?
Well, it's an unfolding situation, isn't it? But you know what? If you can't live without playing the flute, just keep at it. Just keep practicing. Set yourself weekly goals. During the first lockdown, I had an online thing going with my Royal Academy students. They set me studies, I set them studies, and once a week we perform them to each other, and that was brutal. If you don't have something going like that, get that going with one other flute player. Swap recordings. Say, right, in 7 days, let's both learn this and swap a recording, for example. Keep listening. Keep digging out bits of flute playing you haven't heard. And if you don't like it, try and analyze why you don't like it. If you love it, try and get some of that into your own playing. But the big question to ask yourself is, can I live without playing the flute? And if the answer's no, then damn well keep at it. Practice, 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 and occasionally get some input into it and see where life takes you.
Yeah, I think if this year has taught us nothing else, it's we don't know what's coming around the corner. Would you agree, Ashani?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Ashani is now an expert in wine tasting, aren't you, Ashani?
Yes, I've signed up to Travelling Vineyard and I'm becoming a wine host.
There you go. So, you know, to sort of just while you're going along, look
There you
to
go.
other things that support you at the same time. Absolutely.
What else to do in New York when there's not much to do?
Lovely. And we then have a question about how to approach a video audition for orchestras or competitions, which suddenly, of course, we're now having to do lots and lots of video auditions. I've seen people get their knickers in a real twist trying to find the perfect performance. But of course, you're not actually creating a CD, are you, Karen? You're trying to recreate the real event. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, Nicole, you can probably coach them with your invaluable help for, if you get things wrong, like when we can't hear you properly or we can't see you properly, etc., those things are crucial. I'll tell you something that some of you may not have thought of. One of my ex-students, and she'll know exactly who it is. I sat on the panel not so long ago for something she submitted a video audition for, and it was her Mozart G major, which she plays the pants off. She plays beautifully. And do you know, this version, she rushed right to the end, and it seems that she'd got a little complacent. You know, she knew that Mozart was something she plays beautifully. She'd got complacent. She hadn't checked it with a metronome. Perhaps she hadn't had the benefit of playing it with a pianist recently. So that's just one specific thing. Can you steer me in anything else that question might have been?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, doing a recording and listening back to it for sure, like you say, so that you can know these things, can't you? You don't need to necessarily have anyone else to tell you, because you'll hear if it's not in time, if you've got into bad habits during lockdown, which all of us have, including drinking during dry January. So if you do that first, and then maybe give yourself 3 goes to do it and choose the best one, because there will not be a perfect one that you're 100% happy with, and you can get so wound up, and actually it's going to be quite detrimental to your playing in the long run. So that would be my advice. But hey, I'm a violinist, what do I know? What do you think, Ashani? What would you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Check the setup's good, check they can see you properly, hear you, and all those things. And make sure it looks good. When you look back at it, are you happy with what you're seeing and what you're hearing? And because that's key.
Yes, absolutely. Lovely. We've now got another question, Karen. Brilliant and inspiring masterclass, Karen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Yes, you are obviously legendary for recording that bit in Harry Potter. You really are, Karen. So my question is, how do you mentally prepare to play and nail a really technically challenging moment in a concert under pressure? Yeah, obviously you practice in advance and you know that you can play those pesky run-ups to the top D, but how do you make sure that you nail the ones in the concert that really matter? What goes through your brain in that last moment?
Oh, too many questions. What goes through my brain just before? Do you know what? More recently, since life has become more precious to me, in all honesty, do you know what goes through my mind just before I go for that bit that I have practiced so hard? I think, damn you, you've had at least 2.5 hours of my whole life just working at this bit. I'm going to get it right. Now that has really become a thing recently. And I kind of, at that moment, I don't want that voice in my head saying, you haven't practiced this enough. I think I'm a great advocate of practice. You know, just practice so that when you turn up to the gig that day, there isn't that voice saying, I wish I'd practiced it more. You just want to feel like, I have practiced this so much, and never allowing myself to have practiced in any bad habits. So keeping it slow until almost the very performance itself, so that everything is in sequence, all the notes are in the correct order, and then you just whip the quick tempo out and it comes.
So when you're practicing, when you're practicing at home, do you visualize yourself in the moment, in the concert, or are you sort of in practice mode and then the concert?
I don't do that thing of testing myself. You know how you might think, oh, I wonder if I can play it today. I never do that, because this is just me. You're asking me what I do, and I always keep everything under tempo. I just do, and then I with a shot of adrenaline, which tends to make you go faster on the day. If I've only ever played, you know, the flute players know we're talking about the repeated top scales up to top D and Prokofiev Classical Symphony. If you've only ever practiced those at a sort of medium to difficult tempo, and they're always immaculate, I promise you, with a bit of adrenaline, the real tempo on the day, it'll just happen. Yeah. If you keep testing yourself at that virtuoso tempo and you keep messing up and it's still sloppy and you still can't play it, the whole thing's a negative mind game.
Yeah. And you're reinforcing those bad habits.
Reinforcing the bad habits rather than reprocessing and re-entering the correct information into the mind's computer.
Brilliant. We've got a question which I'd love to know. How do you practice your scales and arpeggios? Do you practice your scales and arpeggios, Karen?
Of course I do. I always have done. Hey, no winking from you, young lady. You might not have to practice your scales and arpeggios. I do.
I practice them, but not as much as I should. I mean, when you're really busy, when you're having to go in and you're, you know, you're a busy session lady and you're doing concerts all the time, how regularly do you get them in?
What happens is, you know, I go a certain number of weeks when, as you say, practice hasn't had anything other than a warm-up before the show, or a quick panic practice to learn some new notes that have just come in that day. And what usually happens is I hit the buffers and I realise that I shouldn't even be sitting on that hot seat. And, you know, it may have been 3 or 4 weeks. And then if I get, sorry, I'm not trying to sound bullshitty, you know, if I get a day off, which obviously I've got loads of at the minute, so I am practicing loads now, but in that instance, prior to that, when I was very busy, if I had a day off, I would just knuckle down and look at it all again. And that's when those scales come out. Yeah. And that's when I look at them.
Yeah. We've got a question here, an anonymous question. How do you start a note softly by pulling the tongue away? I heard you mention it with one of the students. I've only ever started softly by using a p sound with my lips, not my tongue. Is there any literature to help with this, or any tips you've got?
Nicole, I love that you're trying. You're doing this brilliantly. Look, the subtleties of it. Huh? Or
sorry, violinist. Sorry.
Love it. You're doing such a nice job. You know that, and there is an analogy of pulling a cork slowly from a bottle and then the liquid coming from it. Ishani might like to use this. We're just talking about her wines. Oh. So what we do is we've already inhaled. We are poised and ready to go. And the only thing that is stopping the air from being evacuated is the stopper between the lips, literally. So you've breathed in, and the only thing that is stopping the air from pouring itself across the flute hole is your tongue. So you literally extract it between your teeth back into your mouth, and the air comes. And I learned that trick from Peter Lloyd, who said for starting pianissimo chords, That was a most, so it meant you didn't have a D at the start. You can get a the like that. So I really hope, so the key thing is that you've inhaled already, you're ready to play. The only thing that stops you is your tongue between your lips, and as you withdraw it, the air escapes, and that's the start of your quiet entry.
Lovely, thank you, Karen. We got a question here from Jeannie, who missed the part where you talked about rhythmic discipline in the Bach with Ben at the Presto, just before the Lieberman. She asks whether it is within the beat or the bar, or in general that you meant. Could you repeat that bit? Can you remember it?
All of the above.
Oh, okay.
So rhythmic discipline will depend on what's going wrong with you at that moment. So there might be a reason. We're talking about the bit that's so it might just be that for 3 minutes practice you want to break that down rhythmically disciplined into a very small fractions, little quavers, and having done that, you go into bigger blocks, and having done that, you might go into 2 beat blocks. So it sounds to me like she's understood the issue very well, and it's not that you should go for one bit of breaking it down over another. You should go for breaking it down into all rhythmic components and checking you're really in your groove.
Thank you. We got a question. What advice do you have for projection, especially within an orchestra?
The trouble is there's so many approaches. When I think of my colleagues who have the hugest sounds, I mean, all those wonderful flute players on their principal flute chairs, they've all got really different ways of doing this. I suppose what I've tried to do, and again, it's because of the school of teaching I came from, Peter Lloyd, who any of you know him as the principal flute years ago of the London Symphony Orchestra, had the most singing, natural, ringing sound. And he taught me that if you've created the resonance, enough ringing resonance within yourself, so with an open throat, really huge chamber in your mouth that is open and not chiseled, so everything is open, that much as I imagine with a singer, then the sound can, in a singing way, travel across the orchestra. It does sound awfully bullshitty, but that's been my approach, which is why all my students know that above all else, it's tone, tone, tone. And on our instrument, it's how to get the silver ringing in the most easy, effortless way by connecting from our open vocal cords, our open throat, through a soft facial setup, and then the sound ringing through the silver and across the orchestra.
Oh, and you really do sound like yeah. Yeah, Ishani and I both played with you many times, haven't we? Isn't she wonderful, Ishani?
She's just a flautist, fabulous, and a stunning sound, a sound which transports you to another world completely. Yeah. We are very, very lucky to have you today, Karen.
Lovely. If you look in the chat window, there's a few links there to
okay, I'll have a look later. I haven't dared open the chat window.
You know what, I wish you had, because, and again, forgive me for the pronunciation, Wissam.
Oh, Wissam, you don't know Wissam. Oh, Nicole, you need to know Wissam.
Because it was lovely to see Karen's joy and enthusiasm undimmed. In fact, it has increased since they sat side by side in EUIO all those years ago. So, what a cool world.
Well, Wissam himself is a teaching legend.
Oh, lovely to have you here, Wissam. We've got 2 more questions and then we'll call it a day. So the first one, hello Karen, could I ask an anonymous question please? How would you recommend incorporating the T and G into daily practice in an approachable way.
So for anybody who doesn't know what T and G stands for, that is Taffanel and Gobert. It's pardon me, it's a Bible called Exercice Journalier, Taffanel and Gobert, and quite frankly, there's 4 in there. So we call them Exercice Journalier, EJ. We've got EJ1, EJ2, EJ4, and EJ7. And I would recommend you do either EJ1 or EJ2 plus EJ4 plus EJ7 every day. You did ask, and that if you were my student, that's what I would have you do. And the main reason for being such a tough teacher with all this is that those few years you are a student, you never get this chance again to consolidate your technique so that you become infallible. And building half-an-hour regimes, adding them onto your scales, such as I've just described from Taffanel and Gobert, it goes a long way to making you as watertight as you can be when you get sat on the hot seat.
Lovely. Our last question, quite a nebulous one. I like it. It's from Leif. Hi, Leif. Thank you for your questions today. He says, thank you so much for your generosity today. Do you use metaphors or inner images when you're playing a piece? If so, can you give us an example?
I say, metaphors or images, quite frankly, no. No, I find that usually I kind of, the music, I get it. Does that sound terrible? I you know, no matter how contemporary the music, even if it's a brand new composition, so I've got and it seems obscure, and it takes many times of listening to it or rehearsing it to understand it or get it. I just find the music does it for me, really. If I, you know, if it's well, even if it's not one of the great pieces of music, usually I just try and connect between the way I want to play it and no. I'm really sorry. That's a big old no from me.
Well, that is good to know. Fantastic.
Sorry, Leif.
And it evidently works, Karen. So absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for this afternoon. It's been just lovely. And thank you everybody who's come on to join us for all your questions. Remember, you can book your own lesson with Karen if you want to, musicalorbit.com, and go and find Karen's page there. And thank you so much, Ishani, who has made this all possible and got up extra early this morning to see us. So thank you, Ishani.
No, thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you, Karen. Fabulous. Really great and inspiring. I'm off to practice.
Oh, very good. Practice your flute. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.